Okay, here we are, Eremos Ministry. Sean St. Jean, I'm Erin St. Jean, and we're here with Joel and Christy Peed. And to start things out, as happens so often with Christians, it's helpful to remember where it all began and how did we become Christians. So Joel, do you want to share your story about how you ended up here?
Sure. Thank you so much, Erin. Well, I grew up in a church and my dad was a minister, and my family sowed a lot of great seeds of faith and that sort of thing. But then some holes started to surface, some gaps started to surface in our family's faith. And that really led to me from about age 15 to 20, just kind of going all out sinful nature, ways of the world, just really no holds barred. And so when I was in college, I was reached out to by a man who invited me to church. And right at about that time, I was starting to really start to experience some of the consequences of my sins and the darkness of the world and some uh, breakup of my mom and dad's marriage after 29 years. And just really, God had prepared my heart to be super open. And while so grateful for my family's faith and upbringing, that those gaps started to really surface. And so studying the Bible and learning what it meant for Jesus to be not only my Savior, but also my Lord, learning about sin and repentance and the refreshment that comes. I repented and was baptized September 29th, 1992. So over 32 years ago. Yeah.
So you're saying you're old?
I'm saying I'm not quite the oldest one on this call.
Oh, Becking.
And that seems like a reasonable bridge to Christy's story. Christy,
Oh, wow.
What-
Balls are up. Hey.
what led to you making the decision to become a Christian?
Well, I grew up in your typical Protestant church, believing in God, but it had zero effect on my heart or my life. And I struggled a lot as a teen with just self-hatred and wanting to find love and acceptance in all the wrong places. And so was living a pretty sinful life, worldly. And after I graduated from college, I was teaching, and my boyfriend at the time, who I thought was the one, suddenly broke up with me, and I was devastated. I was out of college, had my career, just thought the next step was to get married. And I remember just crying out to God, like, why is this happening to me? And literally within the next week, a coworker invited me to church, and God knew I needed a fairly not as good looking as my husband, but a good looking man to invite me to church. Otherwise, I may not have gone. And so I went to church, and it became really clear, like, his motives were pure despite my motives. And it was just like so obvious people really loved God. And as I got to know people, that they actually were living out what the Bible said. And so I studied the Bible and repented of my worldly lifestyle and was baptized in November 13th of 1994. So yes, Joel is older than me spiritually, and I'm just slightly older than him physically.
Well, that's okay. We're united in that because I'm just slightly physically older than Sean as well. So Sean, what brought you to follow the narrow path?
Yeah. Well, I was searching from a young age. I tried to be an atheist, but I wasn't really good at it. I knew that it was really hard to not believe in God, because anytime I got into trouble, I would just pray. Like, I would just say, God, like, can you get me out of this? Like, I'm in so much trouble. And it just revealed my heart. I actually think it's harder to be an atheist. a lot of the time. And I was getting into new age stuff. I moved out when I was 17, went to university. And I do remember crying out to God at one point on a mountaintop overlooking Victoria, BC. And it was a really meaningful, like I think God heard my prayer. And so shortly after I moved to Vancouver, there was a guy who I'd been friends with, and we had this arrangement that once I graduated, I would move in to the dorms with him, and we'd go to the same university. But more of my friends were going to the University of Victoria, and so I kind of ditched him. I kind of, whatever the 90s version of ghosting is, that's what I did to this guy. But then I moved to Vancouver, and I was quite lonely, and it's a little bit embarrassing. I usually don't share this part, but I back then, if you wanted to go on the internet, you had to like go to the library or something. And I was walking to the library because I heard about this place where you could find a wife from like Eastern Europe. And I just felt like I needed something or someone to complete me. It really kind of demonstrated where my heart was at. But as I was walking, I heard coming from the road, Sean, like somebody yelling, and I realized, oh, it's this guy. It's this guy that I ghosted a year prior. And so I pretended like I didn't hear him. I didn't know he was driving with his other brother, and circled the block and pulled over like right in front of me. Like, hey, Sean, like he was so happy to see me. And I'm like, oh, hey, how's it going? Kind of faking this, like, you know, um, kind of faking this, like, good to see you thing. Um, and he studied the Bible with me, and I was baptized in July of 1996. And I haven't looked back. And I know God rescued me, and I didn't even know what to ask for, but he knew what I needed. So I'm really grateful for that. But hey, what about you, Aaron? What's your origin story?
I feel some threads from Joel's story. I was brought up by a mother who was faithful and took me to Lutheran church when I was a kid. So the seeds were planted at a young age. I just didn't really connect the dots and feel like it was, a close relationship between me and God. So went out into the world to seek my fulfillment and happiness, and went to college and fell down a lot, fell in a lot of holes, repeatedly falling in the same holes over and over again. But I was just convinced if I could find the right thing to do, that I would find the fulfillment that I needed. But eventually, after many years, I'm that person that needs to touch the stove and be burned to learn the lesson, sadly. I became desperate, and so I cried out to God and said, "Help, like, I believe you're real. I know you're out there. I just don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. I want this to be sincere. I want this to be authentic. I wanna connect." And so one day I was at a hockey game, eating sushi at a hockey game, and this random girl came and sat beside me, and it started a conversation about the sushi because she just moved to British Columbia from Ontario, and she was like, "I can't believe you can get sushi at a hockey game here." But, anyway, so we had this great chat, and she invited me to church, and of course, I thought she was crazy. But at the same time, I couldn't deny that I had been praying for guidance. I had been crying out to God, and so I wouldn't go to church right away. I would meet her for coffee and interrogate her, because I was a little bit suspicious at that point about religion in general. But eventually came out to church. The first song in the first service I went to was a song that I had loved from church camp as a kid. And I thought, "Oh, like, this is God. It can't not be God here." So, yeah, I was a long study. I was challenging with the poor women who studied with me. Because of course I knew all the contradictions in the Bible and things. So, yeah, they were very patient, and became a Christian when I was 26. And yeah, I feel like, unfortunately, our life journeys are also different, but I needed to live some life and have some pain before I really before I was able to change Jesus from that floating hippie guitar playing Jesus that just loved me no matter what I did to like real Jesus. So yeah, so that's what happened to me. And yeah, very, very grateful for how God very visibly intervened in my life.
Uh,
So I did not go into the ministry. I did not feel like I could manage that amount of commitment and service. But Joel and Christy, you did. So, Joel, do you want to tell us about what led you to deciding to want to be a minister?
sure. Thank you so much. I love hearing all your stories and just how God worked so intricately, even through the darkest, maybe especially in the darkest times. Thanks for that question. You know, God created me with a very sensitive soul. And so I grew up, um, even in high school, I was this peer counselor, which I didn't even remember until my mom had reminded me. But I was just wanting to help people. I felt a softness toward people's pain. And so I felt like I wanted to help people, but I was really good at math and physics and science. And so I went into biomedical engineering. I had my undergrad and engineering degree. But the biomedical part came because I felt like I wanted to help people have a better life through medical technology and research and design. And then when I became a Christian, I felt this amazing things happening in my soul. And so a week or so after I was baptized, the minister talked to me about going into the ministry or training for the ministry is what they called it back then. And I just was like, absolutely not. I'm deathly. So I felt I cared about people, but I was so afraid. Not much of a leader, very timid, pretty quiet individual, and deathly afraid of the stage. Like I would get up on stage as a non-Christian, and my body would just be shaking. Um, and so I just was like, no way. And they kind of was like, well, what's up with that? And got into some of those fears. And in essence, they just said, well, can you pray about it? Yes, of course, pray about it. And in prayer, while praying, I felt like God really called me. And the things that were holding me back was fear and wanting to be approved. And I had this quiet time I still remember by the river in the wilderness. Luke chapter 6, woe to those who, when all men speak well of you. And I thought that's exactly like the goal of my life is for all men to speak well of me. And this fear is really holding me back. So I felt like, how about instead of helping someone physically in their health, I could help someone spiritually for eternity. And so those were the things that pushed me over the edge to agree. I would never have done it without many older brothers in the faith believing in me and being very patient with me and training me in the things that I was super weak in. So yeah, that was 1992, fall of 92, went in the ministry. And that, we don't recommend taking someone that young and doing that anymore. So there was a lot of burnout that almost instantly happened, which we'll talk about later. But that was my initial call into the ministry.
Fabulous. Christy, we understand now why Joel got into the ministry. And were you just dragged along on Joel's journey, or was this a dream of yours? What happened with you?
So I was a teacher. That was what my college degree was in. And I went into teaching because I wanted to change the world. And even in college, I thought, oh, I want to go in the Peace Corps or do something meaningful. Like, I don't want to make a lot of money. And um, for my student teaching, I went down to a suburb of Chicago that was pretty much all immigrant children. And their language, English was their second language. And I just I wanted to do something radical with my life to help people and to change the world. And I came back after my student teaching. I got a job in a suburb of Minneapolis in kindergarten. And I quickly became disillusioned. Like, I thought, wow, these kids are only kindergartners, yet so much of their life is already determined for them because of their family situations or their parent, um, their socioeconomic status. Like, me meeting with them for such a short time is not making that big of a difference in their life. And all this was kind of happening inside of me when right around the time I became a disciple. And I was really wrestling with after my first year of teaching, like I was done teaching for sure. Okay, not only was I disillusioned, but I really did not like working with kindergartners. And so I thought I probably need to go back to school. And I had a friend who was an attorney, and I thought, well, if I could like change the system, like, be a family, someone that helps kids with, who were abused or neglected. So I was toying with that idea, and then the leaders of the church just said, "Do you want to be a summer intern?" And so I jumped at the idea. I was 5 months old as a Christian, and like Joel said, absolutely do not recommend that. Looking back, I realized so many mistakes I made and places that my heart was not right. But oddly enough, it was like a very successful summer internship for me as far as people becoming Christians. And so I was hired full time after that summer. And yeah, that's my story.
And clearly it worked out because you're still here.
I am still here.
So, Sean, you are not in the ministry, which often surprises people when they meet you. Instead, you leaned into the academic world and became a professor and a therapist. Why that direction?
Good question. I wanted to be in the ministry from the very beginning, and it became clear that it probably wasn't my calling at that time. Um, of course, the ethos was every member is a minister, and I still believe that we're all ministers.
Right.
The thing that I think sent me back to school was the realization that I was in these discipling relationships, and some of them I recognized I didn't have the skill set to help some people. And I remember walking down the road with this one brother, and at one point he said, Sean, I don't want to sound prideful, but I don't think you're qualified to help me. And my first impulse was like, yeah, that you are prideful. Uh, and then I realized, oh, maybe I'm prideful to think that I can just help him. And now I know in hindsight that this guy, he met all the criteria for like major depression. So he had a clinical condition that required intervention. And I I just didn't have the skill set to help him. And so that led me to go back, get my master's in social work. I worked in child welfare for 10 years. And then I went back for my PhD. And yeah, so now I train therapists for a living, and it's great. And really I'm being sort of baptized into ministry over the last couple of years. I've had all kinds of like advice from ministers, and now I'm kind of eating my words a bit because I'm recognizing, oh wow, this is really hard, and so it's an interesting time.
Yeah, side note, I told Sean early in our dating relationship that if he was going to go into the ministry, then I was not the woman for him because I could never end up being a minister's wife. So it's interesting how God works and how life evolves. And all of a sudden, we're traveling around together. And yeah, you just figured out the new normal. So, Joel, you decided that you wanted to found Eremos Ministries. What is that and why?
Great question. Eremos is the Greek word for wilderness or desert or quiet place. And it's from Luke. One of the times it's used is in Luke 5:16, where Jesus said he often withdrew into the wilderness to pray. And so that's kind of the background of what Eremos even means. So when I was growing up, my dad is an amazing man. He has the life of the party, his Bible degree from Wheaton. He was a minister. I just worship my dad. But in the mid 80s, he had a burnout experience that was just super challenging for himself, for our family, for my mom. And it just led to a lot of destructive and very sad things. And my dad has recovered, and he's happier than ever right now, and I love him dearly. But that experience was I walked through really kind of with a first seat of the kind of pain, emotional pain. His faith was in crisis, and he at one point felt like he had lost his faith forever and couldn't get it back. And he went into a really deep depression. I haven't had deeper emotional pain than that experience. And then when I went in the ministry, again, I was leading a campus ministry of like 60 people as an 8-month-old Christian, 20 years old. And I burnt out after about a year. I had a very intense burnout experience. I went like deer in the headlights, like blank. Like as a very sensitive person, I couldn't feel anything. I was falling asleep all the time. I was falling asleep behind the wheel. I was falling asleep in classes. It was terrible. I'd try to read my Bible and I'd just fall asleep. And it was just, they didn't know what to do with me. I was acting out in ways that I hadn't even really done as a non-Christian. It was just very, very dark, and I needed to step away. Graciously, they let me go for a while from the paid staff, but still supported me in a great way. They didn't abandon me. And I recovered from that. And then after some great time of just being a Christian, they asked me to go back into ministry. And that was, I did. I went back into ministry, but I knew in my heart this time it was going to be different. I was going to be different, and I was going to build differently in the ministry, and really started to explore what would it mean to be really spiritual, and to rely on God and not our human selves, which really when you see Paul in Corinthians, he communicates, we've gone through this thing so that we would not rely on ourselves, but on God. And so, and then at the same time, I just had a ton of friends burn out in the ministry. It was just devastating. I had leaders, I had peers, I had people that I had worked with. It felt like they were falling like flies. And in the meantime, Christy and I were experiencing this kind of different way of being a leader, and different way of building in the ministry. I'm not going to say that we had it all figured out or anything like that, but we did. For example, even before we had kids, we were like, we're going to have a date every week, and we're going to have dinner every night in our house. And we would have others in a lot of times, but that was like radical. That I was actually, really kind of, opposed by spiritual people for that concept. But I just didn't, it was like, I'm not doing it this way. And so through the early 2000s, we stumbled upon this idea of Sabbath and solitude. And in 2016, we took our first sabbatical. So this whole idea of emotional wellness and maturity in leadership really grabbed me, because I felt like there was a lot of, well, even amongst old disciples, there was still a lot of control. There was still a lot of emotional immaturity or dysfunction. I don't say that in judgment. I was right in there myself, but started to pay attention to how much Jesus withdrew so he often withdrew into the Eremos. And I started seeing this all over the place. And so that we started to develop rhythms, weekly rhythms, seasonal rhythms, sabbatical rhythms. And I saw how it didn't just restore my soul, but how it built our family. So our marriage and our kids, and how they were capturing this faith, the faith in Jesus they felt like it was being more caught than taught through these experiences of renewal and restoration. And so then we planted the church here in Eau Claire in 2006, and we said, how about we plant a whole church based on these principles and just see what happens. So it's by engineering background. I'm just like kind of a research, like, let's just try different things and see what God does. And so we had the freedom to do that, and the trust, and it's just, we experienced the building of a church family. Again, we don't credit ourselves. We credit the Spirit that we were relying on, because we were, at the end of our rope, so to speak, like my wife likes to say. And so we just saw these amazing things of what it did to the church family. And so then we started to get asked to speak, after we took our first sabbatical in 2016, Psalm 23 really moved me about how, as the Lord is our shepherd, will guide us to green pastures and make us lie down near still waters, or waters of rest. So Eremos ministry actually started as waters of rest, because I feel like leaders and ministers they care so much, and they carry such a burden. Someone has to come along and advocate for them, in a way, make them lie down and get the restoration that their soul needs. So we started to get asked to speak on these principles, and really it was kind of the church growth that got people's attention. It wasn't us, but the church was consistently, without campaigns and pushes, the church was consistently just bearing fruit. And so that got attention. But when I was asked to speak on this, I would focus on the wellness of the leader, that a healthy church has to start with a healthy leader, or it's not going to stay healthy for very long. So then in 2022, we handed over the leadership of the local church and officially launched into this new role. So here we go, one step at a time. Figuring out as we go, just trying to be reliant on the Spirit.
Amen. That's a very wise thing to do. So, Christy, it's one thing to say, we're going to do this really, it's countercultural ICOC approach in our family. We're going to talk about rest and solitude and all of these concepts that are not really a part of our ICOC culture in big ways yet. But then you see the differences in your family. You start incorporating it in your local congregation. But then Joel says, let's go. Let's do this ministry. Let's do Eremos. And what did you think of that idea?
I mean, I was super excited. I just, like, in my mind, God has so clearly created circumstances in our life that we were able to just experiment and try to do things differently. The fact that we had moved to Omaha right before, the big upheaval in the church and all the turmoil that was going on. Like, Omaha's not a spotlight city. Nobody was really paying attention to us. And we had this great support group there that really encouraged us with what we were doing. So I felt like that was absolutely God putting us there. And then same thing when we planted the church, like, nobody was paying attention to us. And it was just a number of things, like the people that God brought to hear that we were able to provide an environment for them to heal and to process things and to get healthy spiritually. Even little things like I inherited a cabin close by here that like God provided the space for us to literally go into the wilderness and solitude.
Wow.
And so I think, like I said, in my mind, God had so clearly carved a path for us and blessed us that I was like really excited, like that let's pass this on. Let's do this thing where we can really help other people experience what we've been able to experience.
That makes so much sense. It's like once the spark is lit and you see the change happening and you see the positive impact, it makes sense that you want to share it. It's a beautiful story. Um, so Joel, this was you and Christy. It was working, and then something shifted and you pulled Sean in. So do you want to explain how did that happen?
Well, I think that we just oh boy, what's happening? I've never cried before. Or try to be aware of how the areas I need help. And whether it be planting the church, I just beg God for partners. I can't do this by myself. And I think that right when God started to really put this dream on our heart, I was asked to be in the Minister Wellness Committee by Darren Overstreet. And Sean was already on that committee. And so Sean and I started to work together on the Minister Wellness Committee. But I have my engineering kind of training comes through in a lot of things of how I think and feel and lead and build. And so I was really attracted to Sean's education and research, kind of science-based angle. So as a church leader, a church builder, you think in terms of building and ministry and these sorts of things. But there's gaps in that. There's science, there's research, there's further education, there's cutting edge learning that's going on. And so I was thinking about how to help ministers not burn out. And then I meet this guy who has his PhD, basically specialty in workplace burnout for caregiving professionals. And so I just like my heart started to race listening to him talk. And I just thought, wow, well, this could be an amazing partnership, because if it's all just science, or if it's all just therapy, or if it's all just spirituality, each one of those can kind of be, or if it's all just Bible. I think this is why Ephesians 4 gives evangelists, teachers, elders, administrators together in a team, because any one of those has flat spots and it probably doesn't see its own flat spots. And so together as a team, God, we're so much better. And so Sean and I remember calling Sean one time. I was like, hey, I've got this research idea about what if we have ministers do a Sabbath experiment and we'll just do like 9 months of data and we'll do this research, right? And he was like all geeked up about it. And I was geeked up about it. We've never done it, but we sure have a lot of great ideas. Uh, this is why we need our wives. To try to keep our feet on the ground. But so we just connected with a similar heart, but different training, different backgrounds, but the same heart for God's church and for God's leaders. And we just have started to work on projects together. And then the UK group, Minister Wellness Group, called me a couple of years ago saying, hey, we are in desperate need for help. Will, please help us. And they wanted to do a survey. And I'm like, I know just the guide. So I called up Sean, like, hey, can we do this together? And we started working on that. And the UK graciously hired us to come with our wives to come over. And as that was happening, I knew the Spirit was moving, because there's no way that Sean or I or Aaron or Christy could have done what God was doing there. And you just feel it. You just know it. There's like an anointing. And I just saw the wisdom of God putting different pieces. Aaron was able to facilitate things like I've never seen. Christy was able to teach and provide a women's ministry leader, perspective. And I came from a master's in biblical studies and church builder perspective. And Sean came in with this research and science perspective on the human heart and emotions and healing and trauma. And I was like, this is of God. So God put us together, and I just am thrilled with our partnership because I can't do this alone. We're not designed to do it alone, I'm convinced.
It's true. I remember meeting you guys at the small church conference in Dallas and knowing how badly we wanted this to work and just praying like, God, like, just help me like that. Help something cool. Like, just give us some chemistry. So we really want to do this together. And I mean, right away, our first brunch, I was like, oh, I just want to hang out with them. It's so good, and it's so beautiful when things work out that way, and it's so clear that, oh, yeah, we like you said, like, relationally, we're built to complement each other in different ways, and
Yeah.
it seems like, yeah, God is blessing what's happening here, which is pretty cool. Sean, how did you feel when you first it's weird when you've been talking to someone online for a long time, and then you finally meet them in person. How did you feel when you met Joel and Christy in Dallas?
Well, a little bit short. Uh, yeah. Wow. Yeah, I'm wow. God has taken such good care of us, and I'm also a sensitive soul. I tend to take things very personally. I'm I'm moved easily. I also never cry, um, except like all the time. And it just became really clear that we were meant to do something. We were just so on the same page on so many levels, similar stage of life. And we also have some differences that I think really matter. As you alluded to, Joel, that one of the differences though, I know you wanted a guy with a PhD and somebody with the academic chops. And I was able to do research with burned out social workers based on my own experience. But what I was unready for was the shift from like a 9 to 5 job that's hard, like really hard and traumatizing, but like where there's relief at 5 o'clock, at least until the next morning, to this ministry lifestyle. And everything I thought I knew kind of went out the window when my life started to look more like a minister than a social worker. And I realized I don't know anything. And the thing that really drew me to you was the fact that you're living this stuff. It like let's be real. I'm more the before picture when it comes to this. I'm just gonna put it out there. I have not been able to really adopt everything needed to even just protect my own heart, to protect my family. I'm seeing it. I'm getting a firsthand like taste of how like what a threat ministry is to our hearts, to our marriages, to our relationship with our kids.
Right.
And like you say, I'm kind of a nerdy guy. I like to try to think my way and study my way out of problems. And what I've realized is that I need something qualitatively different. So there's like kind of a selfish element here. Um, I see that you have cultivated these practices that are biblical and godly over decades, and I want in. Like I want that for myself and my family and for my wife, like for all of us. And I want the rest of our church to have it too,
Right.
because I've seen so many leave. Like most of my counseling clients now are are ICOC ministers and ex-ministers. And so many of them are really wounded, or they're just clinging to their role in ministry. And I'm not calling you Jesus or anything like that, but I do think that you have something. By God's grace, He's allowed you to have something that I think our family of churches really need right now, and it's tangible. And one good example is you went away on a 5-day retreat, and in fact, you've gone on a few retreats. And
All my friends, they
yeah, and I remember when I found out, I had this mix of feelings. Like, part of me was like, "Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, you go be with God. Like, that's great." But that was mixed with like sadness and self-frustration that, yeah, I haven't planned a retreat. Like, I desperately need one. Um, and so you're really lapping me here, even after working together a few years, and so I was hopeful that I could learn from you, and like at an experiential level, and because I got all the theories and the head knowledge, but at the end of the day, if we don't live our lives differently, none of it matters. Like, it just doesn't matter. So that's what's meaningful to me. Um, and of course, just knowing you both is such a blessing for me.
That was how I felt in Dallas, was like, "Oh, I hope we like these people. I hope this isn't like Seinfeldian where somebody's a close talker or somebody has man hands or so I like, just please let this be good." And, that's how my brain rests. Not an academic, not a therapist, not ministry stuff, I'm just looking for some basic connection. And for me, I have always just searched, since I became a Christian, for some kind of meaningful work. What can I do that's meaningful? So when Sean and I got married 20 years ago, we decided that I would stay home with the kids, which is not an easy job, does not pay well. Sometimes the employees are ungrateful, so sometimes I can feel a little bit out of the zone working with people because I'm not, professionally employed. And it can be weird, but I've always looked for meaningful work. So that meant, working as a stay-at-home mom or working as a birth doula, wanting to be engaged with people and help them. And so this just really seemed to fit so nicely to our personal ethos, what we want for our family. Like, great, you guys are idea people and you have this incredible wealth of spiritual knowledge. And if I can help to facilitate what you guys have, then that is meaningful. That, floats my boat. And the idea that Sean could learn and I could learn vicariously through you guys by seeing your incredible example. I love it so much when people put their money where their mouth is, right? So many people say so much, but what are you actually doing? What does your life actually look like? And I still have hope. It's not as easy as I hoped it would be. I think I had a hope of some kind of lightning repentance and my husband's work schedule would change dramatically overnight, and we would have all this beautiful family time, and, it's not a magic trick,
right.
and I appreciate so much that you have reiterated many times. It's a practice. You just gotta try, you just gotta do something, start small,
Yeah.
and build, right? And so, as much as I was disappointed right at the beginning that we didn't just change everything, now I'm a black and white thinker. I'm at a healthier place now, acknowledging the process and respecting the process, and that, the effort is not in vain. And
I
developing this culture of rest and solitude and silence, just this incredible connection with God is really all that matters at the end of the day. And I believe in so much what you are doing, and it's easy to support it. Which leads into my last question. Let's start with Joel. What are your dreams for the future of Eremos?
Well, you guys are so gracious. I feel like we're getting more from you than you from us. So I feel like you're very, very humble and gracious and communicating what you are. But I kind of feel like we should just have a big hug too. Like this. Thank you, Aaron. That's a great question. I think that one of our dreams is to be able to restore and revive our fellowship of churches through revived ministers and leaders, paid and non-paid, to be able to go to those still waters, to withdraw into the Eremos, and not in a reactionary way, but in a proactive way. I mean, I've just got off the phone today with a dear friend who neglected these rhythms and now is in crisis, in the ER, so to speak. And my hope is that we will inspire the next generations, the millennials and the Gen Zers, and build a ministry experience that is not just one that they can barely survive, but thrive and actually delight in and enjoy their life and learn how to do that. And I do think it's very important to understand that we don't spend all our time in the wilderness. Jesus was with people and withdrew. There was rhythm to it. We don't spend all our time on Sabbath. It's not 6 Sabbath days and 1 day of work. It's 6 hard days of work and then a day of rest, but there's a rhythm. So our dream is to really inspire our churches, our ministers. Older ministers are retiring. A lot of ministers are burning out or thinking about leaving the ministry, and younger ministers don't want to go in the ministry, a lot based on the lifestyle they've seen from their leaders. And so we're in crisis, and churches all over our fellowship are going without leaders, paid leaders, and non-paid leaders are doing an incredible job, the best they can. But I think having, paid ministers and the training and is also really important. So that's one of our dreams. A practical dream is to have Sabbath, solitude, and sabbatical policies in every congregation. So this is a proactive thing, not a reactive. Just every 7 years, we take sabbaticals. We take solitude retreats. It's in the job descriptions. A network of coaches and counselors, spiritual directors, teachers, elders, a network of support. So if you look at an elite athlete, they have a whole network of trainers and mental health, sports psychologists. They have just a support system. And we're just realizing the kind of strain that being in leadership, the kind of burden it puts on you. Like we're just, well, at least in our church, we're learning. I think like people like Sean have understood this for a long time, but maybe we're now gaining the humility to actually listen and learn to some of the pain instead of just dismissing it. And ministers end up, having shipwrecked their faith. And so to create the support that they need to really be able to thrive, I'd like to think of them as Jonathan partners, where Jonathan helped David find strength in God. So he didn't just help him find strength in himself, because Jonathan was this great friend, though he helped him find strength in God. So this network of Jonathans for every leader that helps them be deeply spiritual and then build spiritually and build healthy. So Eremos retreats, Eremos resources, Eremos research, Eremos relationships, kind of 4 pillar R's to our dreams. Because the research is acknowledging we don't know what we don't know. We don't really know how to do this yet. We want to keep thinking and learning from others. And so always be in a posture of adding to our wisdom. My dream in story form is my 20-year-old son decided this past year that he wanted to leave his mathematics dream to go in the ministry. So my dream is for him to be able to thrive and love being in the ministry. And then his kids and his grandkids will see his faith and his lifestyle. And it will just be a generational blessing. So that's my dream for every minister in our congregation, and for their kids and their marriages and their families, and for their grandkids and great-grandkids to be able to see that faith to be attractive, and not a hindrance to their own walk with Jesus.
Wow, that's powerful. That's significant motivation, more so than most jobs, I would say, which probably means you'll do an excellent job. Christy, do you want to add anything? Dreams for Eremos.
I feel like that was so powerful. I feel awkward even adding on to it. So,
Sean, do your dreams all perfectly align with Joel's vision, or do you have some other ideas?
Well, my dreams do align pretty well. There's a prominent teacher in our family of churches who talks about how, like, the vast majority of repentance in the Bible is corporate repentance. And I've really bought into that idea that it's way easier if we all try to change at the same time. Because if it's just one of us trying to change, we're swimming upstream. This is a culture issue. And I know that some people think about some of the stuff we espouse at Eremos as being kind of like either like progressive or missing the point or self-focused. And I don't see it that way at all. I see this as a repentance issue. I believe in discipleship, and we've been neglecting a massive chunk of what Jesus is calling us to obey. Like we're refusing to do it. So I see this as being more dedicated, more sold out for Jesus. It's just simply obeying. And Jesus said, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And I think we've been dictating to God what we would give him in exchange for salvation. Like we've been trying to negotiate the price. And God's saying, no, that's not how this works, actually. But he's saying it gently and over time. Right. And the truth is, if back in the 90s when we were baptized, like if Jesus was set to come back in like a few months, probably the way we were operating was about right. But he didn't come back after a few months. We're still waiting, and it's been decades. And what got us here isn't going to get us to the next generation. The mentality we've had, although it's been useful in some ways, is it going to help us to succeed in the long run? And I'm not sure it will. So there is kind of a dark center to this thing for me. It's that this is a salvation issue, given a long enough time scale. So I want us to obey God, and I want us to succeed. Practically, I'm excited about building a community that people can be a part of, where we figure this thing out. We're going to be launching courses next year, a membership site, putting out way more content. And I'm excited about us having this conversation together, being in community as we figure this out. Not like, I don't think any of us want to be like the sage on the stage. I think it's more like, hey, yeah, we're throwing a party. Like, let's invite all the people to the party. And that really lights me up when I think about our future together with Eremos.
Yeah, I think it's odd because I would have 20 years ago, I would have said this is selfishness, because the idea of like, how do we seek and save the lost? Like, how do we be a light to the world did not look like this. But now we're seeing, the impact of that that way of living that is just, boots on the ground, go, go, go all the time. And what really stood out to me is when my mom was visiting us a year or two ago, and we said, "Oh, it's just a really busy week, and, next week will be better." And she just kind of laughed, and she was very gentle about it, but she said, "It's always like this for you guys. This is always how you are." And I was really struck by that because I thought, wow, like I want to be a light to the world. That is my job. I want to seek and save the lost. Like I want to share the gospel of Jesus. And am I doing that if my life is like really, in some ways, almost repulsive to others? They see how frenetic and chaotic and stressful it is being a Christian. And it's not interesting. It doesn't draw them in. It doesn't make them want that. So what do I even do? Like how should this look, And then the more and more I started thinking about it, I was like, my family, my kids, my neighbors, so many people I have come in contact with. I have so little margin for anyone because busy, 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 church jobs, lots to do. And so it's been a real mind shift for me, this idea that maybe this is a part of the spiritual maturity process to acknowledge that, yeah, Jesus did go away and Jesus did rest and he had periods of solitude. Like, why? Why does it even say in the Bible that he wants us to live life to the full? Like, we haven't been doing it in my household. So it is a dramatic brain shift to this idea that, yeah, maybe if we do have a bit more margin, if we do have a bit more space, if we do have devoted downtime with God, beside the still waters, it's like maybe that will make me more of a light to the world. And the kids see it, and my friends see it, and I'm really being won over to this idea that this new way of living will actually impact more people in a positive, godly way than the frenetic pace of life. So that's just something that stood out to me in my learning the last year or two with you guys, which I'm so grateful for.
I love that, Erin. And I think it really leads to um, probably what my goals and dreams would be are I see our culture and myself as having been so humanistic. And my dream is that we would learn and grow and be spirit reliant, walking in step with the spirit, and just be in awe of what God can do when we're close to him, when we're listening to him, when we're doing the work he gives us to do and invites us to do, and not trying to control everything and do it by our own power. So that is like big picture, my dream and goal. And I like Joel's the visionary dreamer. I'm the practical, like, okay, yeah, but really, how are we gonna do that? uh, and so one of the goals and dreams I just accomplished was finishing my master's degree in spiritual formation. And right now I'm just taking the time to sort through like, okay, now what is the next thing God's calling me to? But I really am drawn to more the practical, whether it be like giving people practical tools for what do I do on a retreat? What do I do in solitude? How do I spend this time? And there's no cookie cutter answer, but I think there is a lot of room to really equip people. And so I love creating things. I like writing. I like teaching, really giving people tools to help them to draw near to God and to be in step with the Spirit and relying and listening to God.
That's amazing. Thank you guys for hanging out today. Thank you for the chat. It's been great connecting and talking about this Eremos ministry that we're all so passionate about. Thanks.